for being here. Format for this will be, we'll start with just ask you why you're running, introduce yourself to readers, viewers. Um, Try to keep questions to about 2 minutes.
Sure.
I will say something like, thank you, and bump in at a certain point. But the best way to know is if you see me, I'll make an exaggerated gesture to kill my timer. And that's a good indicator that, I mean, round it out. We're not that pressed for time. I don't expect people to just completely cut themselves off. Um, Jason, you are the incumbent, so why don't we start with you? Are we recording?
We are recorded.
Okay. Why don't you tell people why you are running again?
Hi. So I'm Jason Kropf. I'm state representative here in House District 4 in Bend. And I'm also a local attorney. A lot of the reasons I'm running this time continue to be some of the same reasons I ran back in 2020. I spent a large part of my career as a public defender and a deputy district attorney working in our juvenile justice system. So working with kids in the delinquency system and working with kids in the foster care system. And I wanted to sort of work upstream from what I was seeing in the courthouse, right? I wanted to be able to help people get from crisis to stability. And I wanted people and our young people to have real opportunity, right? Educational opportunities and economic opportunities, the chance to reach their fullest potential and the chance to thrive. And that has continued to be a motivating factor to continue to work in this role. We are in very difficult and dark times, right? Those goals, which I think are people really believe in, like stability for folks and opportunity for folks, are really under attack by the Trump administration, right? We're seeing increased cost of living driven in part by tariffs on the federal level. The price of gas has gone up $1 in the last month because of decisions the federal government has made, cuts to healthcare, cuts to food stamps, attacks on our immigrant friends and families and neighbors, and continue to be attacks on the way that we participate in democracy here in Oregon, right? We have vote by mail. We've shown the rest of the country how successful this can be as far as safe elections and including in increasing voter turnout, and that's under attack. So I've been incredibly honored to have this role. I've worked really hard to secure resources for this community. I mean, you can look around for where we are. The construction of the courthouse is partially state funded. The Second Street shelter is funding how they will secure to make that a year-round shelter. The expansion of our St. Oregon State OSU Cascades. But I say all that knowing we have a lot more work ahead of us, and I'm ready to do that work to fight for this community and fight for this state.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Andrew?
Yeah, just for the record, I guess, my name is Andrew Caruana. I am running for House District 54 against an incumbent, which is an experience. But I'll just jump into it. My main reasons for running are that Bend has been a part of my life. The Bend community has been a part of my life since I was young. I haven't lived here permanently for too long. I've been here for a couple of years now. But, I've been coming here since I was a kid because, my mom's had family lives here and coming back and forth to visit family and take care of my mother's sibling who's got some higher access needs. And so growing up, I was able to kind of grow with Bend as it expanded from, when I was younger, relatively small, still somewhat logging dependent into, really thriving, wonderful, awesome community where we're seeing lots of developments happening. We're seeing lots of businesses sprouting up and all of that's very good. And I think that Representative Kropf is correct in identifying there are a lot of downward pressures that the state is facing from the federal government. And I won't repeat them because, summarized them all quite well. But my main reason and my main kind of problem that I'm seeing in the district, and I'll just be blunt about it, is that on the ground, working as an advocate in the Capitol and being in community in Bend, working with local grassroots organizations, the local party, and working on very local issues at a micro level, what I've noticed is that there's been a consistent lack of representation and attention from Representative Kropf that I know that I've personally felt when I've gone in as an advocate to legislate or ask for help with legislating bills. And just to be blunt, that's an experience that I've heard echoed in the community, and I felt like given where we're at with the federal government and what we're seeing with these downward pressures, that we need a legislator who's not just going to be focusing on what Trump is doing at a higher level, but also is going to be focusing on how can I bring as a legislator constituents into the process? How can I make sure that their needs are being represented as their own needs and not just kind of assuming what the district needs at a high level? We need someone on the ground.
Great. Thanks, I do.
Yeah.
All right, the next question. What should the legislature be doing to respond to federal cuts to the state budget? And Andrew, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that, there's no need to beat around the bush with it. H.R. 1 was disastrous for Oregon's budget for a number of reasons. The cuts to SNAP are going to be felt in a significant way in just 2 years once those start to finalize and really make a dent in our state budget. And so if elected, that's going to be an area where I'm going to have to really get in there quick and get my kind of hands in the guts and really look at what we can do in terms of reprioritizing our own budget needs to fill those gaps. But, there has to be a deeper conversation about Oregon's funding structures. And it's not very popular to talk about because people love it. They like getting the returns at the end. But, when we think about Oregon's budget problems, we have to keep a balanced budget. We can't have borrowed money. We have to be at zeroed out. And, when we have a kicker that goes based off of revenue projections and not necessarily based on actual revenue, especially when things are so volatile, it just is really hamstringing the legislature's ability to respond in a proactive way to those cuts, especially because we're a citizen legislature and we're not there. I say we, hopefully me, but we're not there 24/7 to respond to those issues. And so we end up being kind of sluggish. And, I think that there's commendability with what the legislature was able to do in, clawing back some of that federal tax breaks by decoupling from the tax code. But it's also should not be ignored that there were lots of opportunities to decouple in further ways. And there was intense lobbying from very large corporations and very big businesses that prevented Oregon from being more aggressive in clawing back some of those funds that, in my estimation, we've essentially put a Band-Aid on a much bigger wound. And so I think that when we're talking about being aggressive about confronting our budget problems, we need to be aggressive. We can't placate to the needs of corporations and federal government who's habitually been disinterested in playing ball. We need to, as a state, be a leader, set the example, and we need to set the tone for these conversations and stop playing defense.
Season.
Yeah, that's an incredibly timely question. So we got done with a long session in June of 2025 with a balanced budget like we do every long session. And we actually put more money in sort of our savings account than we typically do to be prepared for what we're seeing on the federal level. A few weeks later, H.R. 1 passes, and that balanced budget went from balance with a savings account to $1 billion upside down in a matter of 3 weeks. So a lot of the work we did in the short session was to fix that budget gap and have ourselves be prepared for future budget cycles. So when the federal government was cutting taxes for corporations, we were decoupling from those taxes, from those corporation tax breaks, but we were also expanding the earned income tax credit for the largest expansion in state history. Got to serve an additional 200,000 working Oregonians. When the federal government was cutting, plug budget holes, the federal government cut funding for Planned Parenthood for the services they provide for reproductive health care in general, we reinstated those funds on the state level. We have responsibly balanced our budget this time, holding on to reserves for the next budget cycle. So over the last several budget cycles, we put more money into reserves to be prepared for tougher budget times. So we have general fund reserves of, I believe, around $2+ billion, and then we have school reserves of about a little over $1 billion. So part of the work that we've done was in this last legislative session to balance our budget, holding out for reserves. We know we're going to have to tap into those moving forward. I will also say another thing we've done in response to what we're seeing on the federal level, and we did this work in 2025, is increase funding for our Attorney General's office, right? First year that the Attorney General was in office, 53 lawsuits against the federal government. Many of those when the federal government was trying to take funds away from Oregon. We've been incredibly successful in those lawsuits. Much of that is preserved funding for our crime victim services programs, for housing projects, for transportation projects. So that's a lot of the work that I'm doing. And I would say I'm proud to be endorsed by our attorney general. I think he's doing incredible work in this very time. Graham?
Sure. What can or should Oregon be doing about issues of immigration? We'll start with Andrew.
Yeah, I think that, Oregon has very clear, crystal clear sanctuary state laws. I think that those laws are, they're put in place to protect our immigrant communities, our immigrant neighbors, for a lot of people, family members. I think that the legislature has done a lot of impressive work in the 26 short session to shore up funding for immigrant legal defense services and to really put some guardrails and safety limits on, what federal enforcement can look like by, having efforts to prevent National Guard from being called in, efforts to, have some guardrails around when we're using, license plate camera readers. And those are things that we can point to that are tangible. And those are victories. And I don't want to take that away. But we're, again, we're in a situation where we have a hostile federal administration that is recklessly disregarding federal norms, state norms, local norms, and municipalities. And so, while there's work that's been done, it's great. It's irresponsible and impossible to ignore the fact that, statistically, people are very likely to be touched in, negative ways and impacted by violence against immigrant communities. You have mothers being ripped away from children. You have, violence in the streets. You have, unmarked, masked, unidentified people snatching people in, throwing them in vans and bringing them to detention centers out of the state. And so, again, we're like with the budget situation, we're just, as a state, we're confronting a fast, quickly evolving situation at the federal level. And I just think that we need to be doing more to confront it, because it's not enough to piecemeal legislation, when we have time in a 1 month short session, because there's all this time between, beginning of March and beginning of January the following year, where things can happen and situations can evolve. And so I just want to see more funding and more resources and more support being poured into communities, and also just making sure, crystal clear, reaffirming that the National Guard is not Trump's to call into cities, and that it's not his personal army that he can use and wield on American citizens as he pleases. And we need to take a strong stance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think what is happening on the national level is disgraceful. We, almost everybody in this country, with the exception of indigenous and native populations, have some sort of story of how they got here. My family's story was fled to be in this country for religious freedom. And that's not a unique story. I'm proud to say that we were the first state in the country to have a sanctuary law that started in 1937. And basically what that says is immigration enforcement is a federal responsibility, not a state responsibility. And those sanctuary laws have worked through 7 presidential administrations, Republican and Democrat, including the first Trump administration. So, part of what we can do is build on things that we've done in the past. So I was responsible for a bill in 2021 that strengthened our sanctuary laws. So I was responsible for a bill in 2022 that started a defense fund for people who couldn't afford immigration attorneys. So we started funding that in 2022. We added more resources to that in this last budget cycle to make sure people have access to lawyers when they're going through the immigration process. In this last session, we did work to push back on what we're seeing on the federal level, right? We said all law enforcement that operates in the state is going to be clearly identifiable and not wear masks. That's what NPD does. That's what the sheriff's office does. We made that uniform. So if you're federal law enforcement, law enforcement operating the state, you will abide by the standards that we have and expectations that we had for local law enforcement. We passed laws to try to make our schools and our hospitals safe harbors, right? That had been the law before 2025, that those were sensitive places not to be subject to immigration enforcement. And we've tried to, through state laws, replicate that practice that was moving forward. And then lastly, we created a cause of action that if federal law enforcement officers violate your constitutional rights, that you have the ability to sue them. Similar to what you can do if your constitutional rights are violated by local law enforcement. I'm always going to stand up for our immigrant families and our immigrant friends and our immigrant neighbors. I'm proud of the work that we had done before this Trump administration to strengthen our laws, begin funding immigration defense work. And I'm proud of the work that we did in this last session. I think it was highly responsive to the crisis that we're facing now. And I just want folks to know that we will get through this as a community, that Oregon and Bend is this welcoming community, and we will continue to hear her sounds.
Back to food stamps.
Go back. Yeah, go ahead.
Jason, what can the state expect, and what should we prepare for pending cuts to food stamps and the state health plan?
We have seen significant cuts on the federal level when it comes to food stamps and when it comes to Medicaid, right? So Medicaid is lower income families accessing health care here in the States. A third of the families here in Oregon, 50% of the kids in Oregon are the Oregon Health Fund. We have a number of issues that we're working on in Oregon, but one of the success stories of Oregon is that we've been able to expand that program. I think we have 96 or 97% of the people in the state have health insurance. That is going to be a challenge to replicate those numbers moving forward, right? Medicaid is $9 federal dollars to $1 state dollar. And so we don't have the state resources to backfill significant federal cuts to that program. That is going to be the big challenge moving forward. How do we maintain, how do we stretch our budget resources? How do we maintain resources for healthcare for Oregonians, right? So we are looking at a number of different things. Do we, how we prioritize certain populations of people to make sure people can have health insurance? How do we stretch those dollars? I'm proud of an investment that myself and other legislators worked on to expand Mosaic Medical to get $4.5 million to expand the services they do. They work with providing medical care for a number of our low-income families here in the Tri-County area. Proud that we put funding into Planned Parenthood. A lot of people get their basic healthcare services at Planned Parenthood. Federal government had cut reimbursements for that basic healthcare at Planned Parenthood. So we are going to do everything that we can to sort of preserve this fundamental right that people have access to healthcare in the state, and to take on this challenge to make people, make sure people aren't food insecure.
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, I think, I believe it's 1 in 6 children. I think it's 1 in 6 children that is facing food insecurity in the state of Oregon. And if it's not 1 in 6, it's quite close. That number is alarming to me. As it exists now, that number is alarming to me. When we start thinking about cuts to SNAP, that becomes catastrophic, because if we just, and I'll give a concrete example. If we as a state say, okay, we're losing this funding, we're only going to be able to pay out 75% of SNAP benefits, per person in a household. What are we saying that actually looks like? And that's something that I find concerning about Representative Kropf's answer, and it's one that I have heard frequently as a member of the Oregon Disabilities Commission, sitting in on some of these budget discussions with ODHHS and APD. I hear things like, yeah, we're going to make some difficult decisions, and we're going to have to make really hard budget decisions, and we're going to have to be really conscious about tightening our belt, and we're going to have to cut services. But I'm a person with a disability. I use Medicaid services. So I know what it feels like when those services get cut. I know personally what it means when you get the call that your back injection that you need to not have spinal pain is no longer covered by OHP because of budget cuts. I know what it means when medical rides become less frequent because someone at ODHHS or in the legislature has decided that that's a line item that they can live with cutting. And so I don't know. It's troubling to me, and I want to be frank about that. It's troubling to me that we're sitting here having a conversation about cutting SNAP and Medicaid benefits, and we're talking in generalities and niceties about making difficult decisions. But we're sitting here at this table, and I would challenge you: what are you prepared to cut going into 2027? What are you prepared to cut? Are you going to cut WIC? Mothers and infant children? Are you gonna reduce? Are you gonna advocate for reducing SNAP benefits? Are you gonna make the decision that durable medical equipment is no longer affordable and no longer able to be covered by OHP? We have a responsibility to the voters that we're representing, that we're asking to trust us and be good stewards, to be upfront with them about the fact that we're about to put them through hell for years to come, whether you get this job again or if I'm elected. One of us is going to have to face the fact that we're going to have to destroy some lives and livelihoods because of federal just bastardization of resources and of our budget and of the services that we need. So let's get into specifics. Let's be real about this.
Yeah, I mean, I can say this, right? We've just gone through sort of step one in this process. So what we did is we decoupled from certain tax cuts from the federal government to help fill the budget pool, right? We said we are not going to perpetuate the tax cuts to large corporations. Instead of that, we are going to actually lower taxes to low-income working families. We made a series of budget cuts to try to preserve core fundamental services. We also preserved the money that we have in reserve so that we are in a better position to tackle tough budget cycles. We are going to have to look at our budget in its entirety. And yes, we potentially have some very difficult conversations at us. I think we've acted responsibly to have ourselves be in the best possible position to maintain those core fundamental services like you've talked about for Oregon moving forward.
Yeah, but hungry children, people with disabilities, single mothers are not in the best possible position. And so what are you prepared to cut?
Andrew, in the interest of maintaining the format, this isn't a debate, and we're going to drive the questions.
Sure.
Since Jason did respond to your questions about what he's willing to cut, what are you, I'll give you equal amount of time to talk about what you're interested, what you would be willing to cut.
I mean, if you came to me and you said, we have to cut services, my response is that there has to be another way. We just can't have the conversation where we're cutting essential services to vulnerable populations. We cannot have that conversation. There was money that we could have clawed back further. We could have done more as a state to decouple further from the federal government. We could have done more as a state to be responsible with our tax dollars. Everyone in the legislature in 2025 knew that H.R. 1 was coming down the pipeline. That was not a sudden thing that happened 3 months or 3 weeks after the legislature ended. I was in the building. Those conversations were happening. I had those conversations with you.
I voted in support of the complete decoupling when it was on the House floor, Andrew. I didn't get through the Senate. I voted in support of what you're talking about right now in 2025.
Let's move to the next question.
Sure.
Andrew, this one comes to you first.
Yeah.
Do you support the funding that OSU Cascade secured, and do you feel that was an appropriate amount?
I think it's difficult. I think that buildings with promises of resources get a lot of attention, and they're flashy for media purposes, and they do have benefits to students. But my concern is that I know that a lot of professors at OSU are sleeping in cots in their offices because they can't afford to live in Bend and teach. I know personally several professors who are commuting from Salem because it's more affordable to live in Salem and commute and sleep in a cot for 3 days at a time to teach. And so, yeah, I think that buildings and funding for OSU is great when that's where services need to go. But, as someone who's currently at OSU Cascade, I see a lot of associate staff being underpaid. I see a lot of graduate TAs being underpaid. I see a lot of professors being underpaid. And the thing is, all of the new buildings in the world are not going to replicate or build on the education that professors are providing and that support staff is making available. And so I of course am supportive of funding that goes to OSU Cascades, but I think that as a legislature, we really should be doing more to fund and prioritize and honor and celebrate our teachers and staff members who are making the buildings function. It's not enough to have new buildings. We need to have people who can energize them and make them feel alive, because otherwise it's just it's a museum, and it needs to be a place of learning and expression and creativity and innovation, and we can't have that if we don't pay our staff.
Okay, thank you. JC, do we repeat?
Yeah, no, I got a question. Thanks, Aaron. So I'm supportive of that funding. We're able to secure bonding capacity to help build out that campus. That's a combination of state resources. Students have been charging themselves fees for the last several years to help fund the building of that program, and dollars from a local campus and the local community. So funding for that building helps round out and complete that campus. Before OSU Cascades, we were in this like geographic desert as far as access to higher education. So we were the sort of largest gap in the state as far as young people being able to access higher education. So I'm supportive of that. I think that campus is going to play a huge role in the sort of next chapter of economic development here in Central Oregon. I also think when we have a new campus, we're able to sort of build the higher institution of the future, right? You think about a campus that has really strong ties to a local community college. It's a strong community college. We think about a campus that has strong ties to the main OSU campus. Students could take classes in both programs and transfer back and forth to both programs. And then a campus that is responsive to the local economic needs of this community, right? So you see a focus on starting the physical therapy program. We have this growing healthcare need in Central Oregon, the hospitality program, energy systems program. So I'm excited about the role that campus is going to play in the future of this community. I mean, I do think that campus sort of symbolizes what this community is about. Like, that is our old dump, that's our old landfill that we are repurposing into the campus of our future. So I'm supportive of that funding. I will say that is probably the last funding for that campus for a while, given the dollar figures that you're secured through that.
Okay, so this is a two-part question. We get a little extra time to answer. There are two sides to the gas tax vote. Do you feel it was appropriate for the gas tax vote to be on the May ballot versus the November ballot? And the second part is, given that this gas tax does not appear to be favored by a majority of Oregonians, what do you think the future for ODOT looks like? Jason, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yes, I voted for it to be on the May ballot. One, just from a pure budgeting standpoint, like we need to begin the process to figure out what that budget looks like moving forward. And if we waited till November to work ourselves and have just a few months to go into the long budget session, I don't think that's enough time. Historically, when things like this has happened in the past, they've been on the May ballot, and something referred from legislative action, they've gone on the May ballot. So it's historically consistent, and from a governance standpoint, it just helps us from a budgeting standpoint. Funding our transportation system is a very difficult and complex thing, and it's made even more difficult by what we're seeing with gas prices right now. I think gas prices have gone up by $1 per gallon here in Central Oregon through the state in the last month. We know what the cause of that is. I also look at where we are with transportation as an opportunity, right? So the governor has convened a task force for a wide range of stakeholders from different viewpoints and different political ideologies. And what's the infrastructure, transportation infrastructure that we need and we want, right? What are the sort of options on that? What are those core functions of ODOT? What are those primary things we have to make sure happen? To me, that's maintenance and safety and making sure that path is plowed in the winter in appropriate time frame. And so we're taking that opportunity to look like, what is that infrastructure that we need? and then start the conversation about how do we fund that, how we fund that in an equitable way, right? So that system is supposed to be sort of self-contained. The users of the road or pay for the road, right? And that gets more complicated when we're talking about electric vehicles and more fuel efficient cars. So I'm looking at this as an opportunity to do, to really look at what the transportation system we have now is, what that should look like in the future, and to work with a bipartisan group of stakeholders on how we fund that to make sure it's done in an equitable and fair way.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll start with the moving of the gas tax to the ballot. That's an easy one for me. I think I don't really have a preference, or not a preference, it's the wrong word. I don't really have much of an opinion on it, only because I think, just to be blunt, I think the argument that it was inherently political carries about as much weight as the argument that it was purely for budgetary reasons. It's probably a little bit of both. And it was the legislatures, it was within their purview to move that, initial referendum to the May ballot, and they did, and that's fine. But what I think we really need to talk about when we talk about this tax and we talk about the affordability issues with it is that what the legislature did is they looked at ODOT, which was an agency that was burdened with debt. And we had a couple of projects that were mismanaged, and there were some promises made with the 2017 transportation package that frankly were not upheld. And we got ourselves into a pickle, and the legislature's solution to that was raising the gas tax by 6 cents per gallon, doubling title fees, doubling registration fees, tripling road use fees for electric vehicles, and doubling the payroll tax. And that was the compromise version of that legislation, only because Senator Meek held out for a really long time. And that was the compromise version of that legislation. And that compromise legislation, we got to be honest about it, is an unbelievably regressive tax that affects low-income and middle-income individuals and families astronomically. And so I'll be honest, I think that that entire special session, that legislation came out of it was both a political mistake in an affordability crisis, and it was also entirely insensitive to the needs of Oregonians. And so as a legislator, if elected, we're obviously looking at a situation where that gas tax is not going to pass on the May ballot. And I know this, and Representative Kropf knows this. The legislature has already been moving money around to cushion ODOT in anticipation of this failing. So I don't think we need to beat around the bush on it. When it comes to reworking this package and trying again, I think we need to be more responsive to the financial strains of our communities, because I think we missed the mark. I mean, I sat in a legislative town hall with Representative Kropf, where he confidently said that he was working really diligently on the gas tax and all the other things that were going into that bill, and that we were all going to pay our fair share, but forcing those burdens onto low-income people doesn't really feel like a fair share to me. So if the contention to funding road projects is the gas tax not being sustainable due to more fuel-efficient cars, let's think about doing away with the gas tax and find a different way to get road revenue and road fees that doesn't involve that. I mean, we're smart, we're capable people. I firmly believe that the 90 legislators that we have and all of our state agencies can put our heads together and come up with something that is not going to hurt low-income communities.
Thank you.
This is a drought year. Do you feel there are enough resources available to fight what could be a really bad wildfire season? We'll start with Andrew.
Excuse me. No, I don't. I think that we've seen, I think, the lowest snowpack that we've had, if not ever, in a very long time. We're positioned poorly for fire season in the summer. And I know that there's funding that's been earmarked for when that happens, because it's not an if at this point. But no, I don't think it's enough. And I think that, it's impossible to have the conversation about fire safety and fire suppression without having a lighter conversation about what's causing some of our environmental impacts, mainly the deprivation and degradation of our water supplies via, data centers. But I think that the Oregon legislature he's probably going to need to go back in the summer and reevaluate and put more funding towards fire resilience and fire safety, because one aspect, and I'm going to go on tangent for a minute because it's important. I think one aspect of fire that doesn't get hardly any attention is the fact that when we have fire evacuations, we have lots of vulnerable people, people with disabilities, people who have language barriers, and so they don't always have access to evacuation resources. Even with translations, we don't have enough translations to cover our communities. And so the thing that I'm most concerned about is when we get into a situation where we're having fires, we have a large percentage of our community who just is not able to get to safety and is not able to get the resources that they need. And that's because as a state, we've not done what we need to do to meet those individuals in that moment. We need to do more to protect our disabled constituents and citizens in fire seasons, because they, higher than almost any other group of people, look at the air. Look no further than the LA fires. Disabled people die statistically much higher rates in fires because we just get left behind. And I think that as a state, not to make a stump speech out of it, but as a state, we need to be prioritizing policies and legislation around fire safety that aren't leaving people behind, because right now we're just not hitting the mark.
Good. Well, Jason? Yeah, I mean, it's a very timely question. People are very nervous about what this upcoming fire season can look like, right? I drive over it past all the time, and I drove over past this winter every week, and it was remarkable how far you had to drive before you hit snowpack. So people are very nervous about that. So to say things that we've done to help be prepared for this, right? We've secured a permanent funding source last legislative session for wildfire mitigation work, right? How do you make our forest more resilient? So added to the funding that we have done in the past. So how do you make what we've seen like the Phil's area prescribed burn thinning to make that fire more resilient to catastrophic fire? We have money set aside for wildfire, for this wildfire season. We also have money in reserves if it goes beyond expectation. That happened a couple of years ago when we had the highest wildfire costs in state history, and we have money set aside to meet those responsibilities. We are in a similar position. We have to get through this wildfire season and then continue the work that we've been doing to be preventative when it comes to that, right? Continue to adhere to our climate change goals, right? We sponsor a bill in 2021 to move us to 100% clean energy by 2040. We need to continue to do work on that to tackle climate change. Like I said, able to work on a bill or vote for a bill last session that had dedicated revenue source for that wildfire mitigation service to continue the work that we've seen through all our forests to be resilient to wildfires. I also think Core 3 is going to continue to play a big role in our emergency management system, right? We've been able to secure, I think, in the time I've been in the legislature, $20 million or so for that out in Redmond. That is going to be the emergency management hub for the state moving forward. So we have money set aside for this. We have money reserves if it's a catastrophic wildfire season, and we've been dedicating resources to combat climate change, to make our forests more resilient, and to have a holistic approach when we're talking about emergency systems. So I'm nervous about what this season looks like, but I also know that we have done a number of steps to be prepared for this upcoming season.
Thank you. I've lost track of who he asked first. I think it's me. You're coming up next. Okay. The liability waiver issue was a point of concern for our community. Do you believe the compromise legislation was appropriate and met the community's needs?
So I do. So we spent a lot of time working on that and honestly, it was a group of Central Oregon legislators that were at the forefront of that. Senator McLean, Senator Broadman, Representative Levy, and myself played a large role in shaping that legislation. Up until that, had met with a number of different business owners, insurance companies, to be prepared for the short session of what that would look like. So fundamentally, what that piece of legislation did is say, wanted to make sure that that people who are participating in the sports would be informed of what their responsibilities are when they ski or bike or go to the gym. Making sure that things that are outside the control of a business owner, right? Business, a rafting company can't necessarily control what the river's going to act like or what the weather's going to be like up at the mountain. So make sure that, and then really define the core safety functions of businesses, right? So we reinstated waivers back in Oregon, saying that the waivers could be signed by participants, and then we said here are the core safety things that business owners need to make sure they do. And a lot of that came from conversations with business owners, right? We had conversations with, use an example, it's the owner of, I met with owners of rafting companies and gyms who said, I have clean safety records. Here are the things that I do. Here are the safety prioritizations that I make, and sort of embedded those into our statutes. So I'll give an example. We made sure that business owners, when they provide safety equipment, they're being diligent about that safety equipment that they're providing to their participants and that they are responsible for that. So I think it is an approach that identifies sort of core safety responsibilities for business owners. I am hopeful that it stabilizes insurance for those businesses. It's a large part of why we love this community, the ability to get outside, recreate. So I am grateful for the work of my colleagues and a variety of stakeholders so we can get that piece of legislation done.
Andrew, do you want me to repeat the question?
Sure.
So the liability waiver issue was a point of concern for this community. Do you believe the compromise legislation was appropriate and met the community's needs?
Yes, I think the compromise legislation was a testament to the really, really hard work of the Central Oregon caucus and the tough negotiating that happened. And I think that what we ended up with was a bill that everyone was pretty happy with. There were compromises. Not everybody got everything they wanted, but we got a bill, and we solved an issue that was long overdue, that needed to be solved. But on that note, I feel like it's important to talk about why liability waivers took so long. And, it's been a consistent thorn in the side of a lot of recreational businesses in Bend over the years who have wanted this kind of legislation for a long time. And those efforts have been on multiple occasions. And I know this from conversations that I've had with recreators. Those efforts have been stymied on multiple occasions by Representative Kropf, being at times antagonistic to the negotiating process, at times unwilling to engage in the negotiated process, and at times trying to take control of the negotiating process. And I think that yes, there's room to celebrate the absolutely wonderful compromise that happened here today, but there needs to be an acknowledgement about why it took so long to get here. And the answers to that question are Jason Kropf and the enormous amounts of money that Oregon Trial Lawyer Association has pumped into his PEC.
Thank you. Do you want me to respond to that? Or?
Sure, you can respond.
So I would say this: it is a complicated issue to try to create a workable legal framework for this. I spent countless hours on this bill, meetings before session and during session. I don't think that a day went by during a short legislative session that I wasn't involved in this piece of legislation. I met with insurance companies. I met with people who had suffered catastrophic injuries when they were involved in recreational activities. And I met with multiple business owners to try to come up with a framework and a solution that would work for Oregon. Every single state is slightly different on this. And so I'm proud of the work that I did with other legislators and other stakeholders to figure out in this legislative session what an Oregon solution would be. And it's something that can serve our state moving forward.
Andrew, you want to add anything?
Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to dispute that the legislation that we got this session was good legislation, but I can't in good conscience ignore the fact or overlook the fact that my opponent in this race gets a lot of money from insurance companies, gets a lot of money from Oregon, has gotten a lot of money from Oregon Trial Lawyers Association. And is a trial lawyer by trade. And so there were some conflicts of interest at play in those negotiations over the years that made these conversations very difficult. And I feel comfortable saying in this room in this moment that if it hadn't been for efforts to stymie that legislation, we would not have needed to come to a compromise legislation. We could have had a legislation period, and that could have happened years ago.
Thank you. Well, that is we're at the conclusion of our questions. At this point, I'd like to just offer you guys an opportunity to address anything that we failed to bring up, and also to take a moment to tell readers, viewers, listeners why you're running. And Andrew, will start with you.
Sure. I am just to go over some things that I think we could talk about. I've made mention of them. I think a big issue in Oregon is campaign finance reform. And we saw campaign finance reform on the ballot a couple of years ago that passed overwhelmingly. And what we saw in the short session was the legislature vote overwhelmingly to weaken it to the point where its original sponsors outside of the legislature encouraged legislators to vote against it. That is a moral failing of the legislature. And in this race in particular, I am running against a candidate who takes a lot of money from PACs. For example, over $5,000 from retail grocery PACs, over $4,000 from Amazon, over $3,000 from Comcast, over $3,000 from ADT, several $1,000s from artificial intelligence companies, and quite a bit of money from PACs. And so the question that I would pose to viewers, and that I percolated on myself quite a bit going into this race, is when you have a candidate who is propped up so profoundly by large donors, and particularly corporate donors with vested interests, you need to ask yourself, who is this legislator really going to be representing in the legislature? Is it going to be you? Or is it going to be Amazon, who wrote a very big check? And we're seeing this play out in real time in legislative dynamics as we see AI data centers sprouting up all over rural Oregon, sucking up water supplies, sucking up electricity, having those costs be passed on to the consumers shamelessly. We just saw rate increases approved for Pacific Power and General Electric. Those rate increases have gone up 50% over the last 5 years, when AI data center usage has gone up 70% in the same time frame. I think it's 70% in 2 years. So we're seeing corporate interests being subsidized at the expense of the individual. And we're seeing that because corporate interests are able to pump unlimited amounts of money into these races and get these favorable deals, like having tax breaks for their data centers. And the legislature, of course, acted eventually once there was blowback and they said, okay, we're going to stop. We're going to wait a minute. And we're going to put a 1-year moratorium on tax breaks for data centers. That only gets us past the general election, which I would contend is more of a political move than an ethical move to alleviate the burden on Oregonians. If we're going to talk about affordability in Oregon and we're going to talk about taxes and revenue, we need to talk about the fact that certain corporations with big checkbooks have been getting free rides. And as for, am I getting close on time?
You're close.
Okay, I'll be quick. As for my candidacy, I really just want to make clear that my number one priority is that I want to be accessible and responsive to the needs of community members. I'm not taking corporate money. I'm not in it for my own interests. I want to be a legislator for the people of this district because I love this district. And frankly, I and others have grown tired of apathy at the legislative level. And I know as an advocate from my own experience, having my bills get shot down, that when I needed legislative help, I went to another office because I didn't feel represented by who's currently sitting in that seat. And that's why I'm running today. Cool. There you have it.
Okay. Jason?
No, thank you. Thanks, Andrew, for being here today, and thanks for having us here today. I have loved living in this community. I've lived here since 2003, and I feel incredibly grateful to be able to raise my family here. It has been an incredible honor to represent this community, right, and to try to push Central Oregon and Bend forward. If you take a tour of this community, you can see some of the impact of the things that I've worked on as a legislature, right? You can look at the expansion of a courthouse, funding that we were able to secure. You can walk on the Oregon State University Cascades campus and see the Innovation District work that's being done, the Student Success Center that was built, the Health and Recreation Center that's going to be built. You can walk over to 2nd Street. When I started serving in this legislature, we did not have a year-round warming shelter here in Central Oregon. Every single fall, there's an article in the paper about where's the year-round shelter going to be this winter. In my very first session, I was able to secure funding for the purchase of that building on 2nd Street, and then secure funding to turn that into a navigation center. So not only people can get care for the night and shelter for the night, but to get holistic services to help move them from crisis to stability. Able to secure funding for Mosaic Medical to expand the incredibly important healthcare services and mental health care services that they provide for us. Secure funding for the St. Charles Psychiatric Center that's being built. So it'll be the first youth psychiatric care facility here in Central Oregon. Funding for the Stabilization Center, funding for Best Care, and expanding behavioral health and mental health dollars. So I say that for the work that I've been able to do in partnership with this community, with local leaders and local stakeholders, and to talk about the work that we still have ahead of us. I am committed to continue to work and tackle the main problems that we're facing here in Central Oregon. First and foremost, the affordability crisis. We have, Andrew talked a little bit about data centers and utility. We passed legislation in 2025 to spread out and level out those utility increases that people are seeing. We passed legislation to make sure data centers pay their fair share for the power that they use. In this last legislative session, when the federal government was cutting taxes for corporations, we were cutting taxes for working families. We made the largest increase in the earned income tax credit in the state's history, expanding that program to an additional 200,000 working Oregonians. We tackled predatory lending. We tackled corporate ownership of housing. And I say that to demonstrate the commitment that I have made to this district and the state, but also the work that we still have ahead of us. We need to continue to build more housing in a responsible way. We need to continue to provide healthcare services and mental health care services, and we need to make sure that our schools are appropriately funding and giving those real educational opportunities. I'm excited about what I think is going to be the next chapter in Oregon's economic development, right? I grew up here in Oregon at a time when timber was at the forefront, right? The smokestacks down in the old mill are a testament to what we used to be. And I think that there's a ton of work on what's the next economic chapter going to be here in Oregon. So I am appreciative of the work that's ahead of us. I'm appreciative that I have a community and local leaders in the state that's willing to stand up against Donald Trump and to continue to push Oregon's values forward. These are dark, difficult times. When we stand together and work together, I'm confident that we can get through it.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank both of you guys for taking out of your busy schedule. Campaigning is tough. Moments to sit down with us, help us get more informed. It's the role that we take great pride in getting to know more about these issues and the candidates who want to represent us. So thanks for carving out this time and for putting yourself out there in the public sector. It's not easy.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.